Hello, I'm David DeCosmo. Welcome to ECTV Live. I'm here with my co-host Rusty Fender for another week's program. We normally talk about all kinds of free things that are available to you, and we hope you'll take advantage of those entertainment and services. Today, just a little bit different, because today we're actually looking for your help. We're going to be looking for your input, and our guest today is Keith Williams from the Northeastern Pennsylvania Center for Independent Living. And I guess maybe before we get into the request we're going to make from those who are watching us, Keith, perhaps we better tell them a little bit about the Center for Independent Living.
Sure. Okay. Thank you, Dave. Rusty, it's great to be here.
Good to see you, Keith.
Good to see you, and thanks for the opportunity to talk a little bit about the center and what our initiative is about. First of all, with the basics, the Center for Independent Living, or CIL, as you'll hear me call it for short. Everybody has their own form of alphabet soup, and we're no different, our acronyms. The CIL is a nonprofit organization in Scranton that serves people with disabilities in 10 counties. And we provide information referral, skills training. We have programs that help people with disability employ their own personal care attendants, a variety of programs that are designed to keep people with disabilities as independent as possible. On the flip side of that, we also offer community programs and services and community grassroots advocacy, such as one of the initiatives that we're here to talk about today, and that is spreading awareness and kind of raising the collective public consciousness about the needs of people with disabilities for accessibility, say in public buildings, curb cuts on sidewalks like we're here today in downtown Scranton, the importance of accessible transportation like lifts on buses and county-operated paratransit services, and just the general need to promote the inclusion of people with disabilities into society.
So if we have someone watching who either has a disability or has someone at home with a disability, would they be able to contact your agency for recommendations, for help, and is it something they've got to pay for?
No, not at all. Nobody with a disability or a family member has to pay a dime. They can contact our agency, and we can help them with the different types of services that they might need, or any type of community resources. And if it might be a particular program or service that our agency might not offer in particular, we know the ones who do, and we work collectively. We network with other organizations throughout the 16 counties that we serve. We don't operate in a vacuum. We work collectively to solve people's needs.
You know, it took a long time to get the folks with disabilities more or less moving, for a lack of a better word. And it was great to see that all the towns now, at least about 90% in the country, as you mentioned about the curb cuts, up to standard for wheelchair accessibility. And a lot of folks, I know, being an engineer, they ask me about those colored pads which are put in the curb cuts. And I bet a lot of folks don't know. That's for the blind. It's more or less braille for the feet that let them know that there's an intersection around. People always ask me what those are for, and I knew that when they were putting them in as far as construction code, that those little raised buttons, those rectangular pads at every curb cut to allow easy access and easy transport down to the pavement level to cross the street of an intersection, is for the blind. And wonderful thinking over the past 10, 15 years. It should have been a lot sooner, but you know, should have, would have, could have. But at least things are really getting up to snuff now for the disabled folks.
Exactly, Rusty. And you know, you raised an excellent point. When we talk about accessibility in your example with curb cuts, with the raised tactile warnings, the tactile bumps, we also talk about the need to comply with the ADA, which is short for the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, that requires that all public and private buildings, for the most part, a couple of exclusions, but about 99% of them, be accessible for people with disabilities, and that they proactively remove barriers for accessibility. So for example, we had laws on the books for years that said that new construction and renovation needs to be accessible for someone with a disability, and that's fine. But then the ADA came along in 1990, and it proactively requires businesses, even when they're not planning on undergoing any renovations, to remove barriers where it's readily achievable, which means easily accomplishable without much difficulty or expense. And your example, your illustration of the tactile bumps on the curb cuts is a good example, because when we talk about access and inclusion, you don't just need a physical disability to benefit from access. It can be someone with a visual disability in that sense, and, for example, someone who is deaf or has a hearing impairment. The ADA requires that sign language interpreters be provided in a lot of circumstances, a lot of instances. So we need to open our eyes and open and embrace the idea that accessibility means a lot more than just ramps and curb cuts.
And while it is something that is right, it's something that should have been done, as you said earlier, it's something that is proper, it's also so logical and so economically beneficial, because when a business owner makes his or her establishment more accessible for anyone with all sorts of disabilities, they benefit by virtue of the business coming to them.
Absolutely. And then folks argue that it's cost prohibitive to do that for a new building. Let me tell you something. They did it at Grand Central Station, New York, a 150-year-old building. And if they can match up the marble and the granite, and they can make ramps for the disabled and all that at a 150-year-old, one of the most historic buildings in the United States, if not the world, then they can do it at Joe's Bar down the street.
That's right. That way we'd have equal opportunity to both places.
Absolutely right.
Right.
And well, you should.
Exactly.
As I indicated at the start of the program, Keith, we're doing something a little unusual here in that, and you're talking about the services that are available, so perhaps we're fulfilling our normal mission there. But by the same token, we are this time looking for the public's help. Now, our request for their assistance stems from a grant that you received. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That's correct.
So tell me about that grant. What are we trying to do, and how can people watching us pitch in and help?
Yes, that would be great, David. There's an organization called the Developmental Disabilities Council out of Harrisburg that provides federally funded grants to nonprofit organizations to work on different advocacy projects throughout regions of Pennsylvania. And again, much as the Center for Independent Living's mission, their mission is to help fund programs that promote inclusion of people with disabilities into the community, and again, raising public awareness. And one of the community advocacy, collective advocacy programs that they have are grants related to whatever a particular need is in certain regions of Pennsylvania. The SIL received a grant that is involved with voting issues for people with disabilities throughout 4 counties, Lackawanna, Luzerne, Susquehanna, and Wyoming counties. It's just targeted to those 4 areas. And one of the kind of ongoing missions that we've had is to get people with disabilities registered to vote, to show that we are a significant part of the electorate, and so forth. But here's what we are looking for your help in educating people today. Part of a major focus of the grant is for people with disabilities, family members, human service agencies within those 4 counties, but particularly people with disabilities, to gauge the accessibility of their polling site in their area, or lack thereof. We want to know what some of the barriers are that people with all types of disabilities may or may not face when they go to vote. And we are looking for people to take a survey. It's fairly short. It's only a 1-page survey. Comprised of about 16, 17 yes or no answered questions when they go to vote on election day at the primary election on May 20th. And we'll be doing it down the road, so we're also hoping to stimulate interest for November as well, where they can actually take the poll with them, fill out a series of yes-no questions, and send it back to us, to the SIL. And in turn, we tabulate the results and then advocate for barrier removal wherever needed.
So you want people to get this form, take it with them when they go to the primary, which is coming up on the 20th, I believe.
May, yes.
Rusty? And then after seeing their particular polling place and the physical setup there, they can then answer those questions, get it back to you.
Exactly. Right. And then in turn, what we'll do is tabulate the results, and we'll meet with each respective county election bureau and advocate for barrier removal and let them know where the good sites are as well, because it works both ways. And we believe that you know, in addition to pointing out where some of the problems are and advocating for barrier removal, we'd like to acknowledge the correct authorities and principles when access is provided. Now, we already did this. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, we already did this on a small scale as a test in the primary election, the general election in 2013, but just on a very, very small basis. Got some consumers to fill them out. But we're looking to go broad and to go live with this now. And we want as many people with disabilities as possible to take the survey.
See, Keith, Dave, I think this is a good pioneering effort, especially for small town USA, smaller towns, because, of course, we're relegated in an area like this in the 4 counties you mentioned, where voting, polling places are in the basements of churches, halls, downstairs in the local fire department, or hose companies as they're called.
Great point.
And that's the problem. You wouldn't have this in Manhattan or Philadelphia because they would put them in a little more of a, you know, a friendly urban setting. But in towns like this, it's a catch-22. They're relegated to the local church basement, which has been there for the last 87 years, and it's certainly not, probably not even up the building code, let alone up to the disability code and all that. So I think this will be a treasure trove of information, starting this on a small town level, like a smaller area level like this, and working its way up to regional and then national, don't you?
That's exactly what we're hoping, Rusty. We would like to see this serve as somewhat of a pilot project, and then down the road maybe be able to get into all 16 counties and beyond, so that organizations like ours, and there are 18 CILs across Pennsylvania, that other centers can do a similar project. And a lot of them in the past, historically, have done some type of voter education or some type of a voter initiative that involves people with disabilities.
And I'm thinking that in that same area, Rusty, we have quite a variety of methods of voting. Now, you don't have Columbia County in there, but Columbia County still votes by paper ballot.
Absolutely.
Luzerne and Lackawanna County have electronic machines, but they're different types of machines.
Right.
And as I picture going into my polling place, I know that the physical access in terms of the doorway, etc., it's the first floor. That would be easy. I think just coming up to the machine, if you're in your wheelchair, I stand at my machine. How easy is it to lower that machine for you?
See, now, at my polling place, and again in Duryea, they've changed polling places from the Excelsior Hose Company to the basement of the Sacred Heart Church, where it is now. And that does have a ramp, but again, there's steps at the bottom, so that's a problem right there. And you're right. But the now I've noticed the electronic polling machines at the Sacred Heart Church in Duryea, they're on a tripod, like a camera type of setup. So that's good. They could be lowered for someone in a wheelchair or a disability. So again, there's not a lack of rules and regulations. There's too many rules and regulations. It varies from polling places.
And that's what you want to know.
Exactly. That's the data that we're looking to collect. We want to see what the barriers are. And in your case, Rusty, you mentioned the ramp. So even when someone navigates the ramp and they get down the ramp, there's a step at the bottom?
And there's about a 3-inch lip on the door jamb. So the door jamb, I mean, you have to be Hercules to get this wheelchair without assistance over this door jamb, because it's the actual threshold of the door is higher than the actual sidewalk. It was put in later to alleviate, you know, some of the stairs that had, you know, been before the ramp. But nonetheless, there's still a disability there, even though they had worked on it. There's a lot of building regulations, a lot of construction regulations that, you know, preclude and prohibit getting it up to code. But, you know, if you want to look around, there's probably a restriction at every place you go.
Well, true, but here's the issue with the advocacy comes in. I mean, yes, in your case, that should be an area that sounds like it would be fairly easy to correct and make it more accessible. However, in terms, if we just look strictly within the world of voting, it's incumbent on that county's election bureau to make sure that the polling sites are accessible. So if that were problematic, let's just say for the sake of argument that it wasn't possible or it wasn't really achievable to make that barrier, to remove that barrier and make it accessible, it's the County Election Bureau that would have to move that spot.
Do they have inspectors that go around and check these things?
They're supposed to.
I see.
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they do. And quite honestly, we've seen a lot of instances where it will slip by. And you talked earlier about hose companies, and what we run into there. Ironically, it's great because they're obviously accessible because it's a garage kind
level.
of setting.
That's right.
Ground level.
Garage
but
level.
the problem will be, particularly in rural areas, is that they don't have a paved driveway. So it's crushed gravel, crushed stone.
Never thought of
so
that.
when someone gets out of their vehicle,
it's like
particularly if they're in a motorized chair,
sure.
it's very difficult to run over
Never thought of that.
to navigate across loose gravel.
And playing the devil's advocate, I know that election bureaus sometimes are faced with a sudden change in polling place. Perhaps there's been a fire at a place they normally use. Perhaps the owner just doesn't want to lease it out anymore. They've got to make a change.
Or there's a paid event on that day, which would normally be a free event to let the voters use it.
Right. Now, you've got to be in a certain voting district, so they're limited geographically as to where they can relocate.
Right.
And then within that district, they want something as accessible as possible. But I wonder, and both of you bring this to my mind, an inspector checks a place and says, yes, I can get a wheelchair in here very easily, but there may be little things, gravel out front, that you just don't think of when you're not faced with the problem.
Never thought of that. Right.
You know? So this is why your input to this survey is crucial, because if you're going to check your polling place and answer this form, you'll be able to make sure they're aware of these things. Then it will be up to the Election Bureau to see that that is remedied or do what they can. I don't know if finances are readily available for them to make changes, but there may not be major changes. There may be very little things that can be done.
And you're right, accessibility is a lot more than just a double door.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah, but that's what we think of.
Exactly.
That's exactly it. There's so many facets to it. And in terms of what county election bureaus should be consulting, and it's never too late because there's always a need for ongoing access, is the United States Department of Justice puts out a checklist that any county election bureau can follow to assess their levels of accessibility or inaccessibility. And then step 2 of that is the survey provides concrete, pardon the pun, but concrete solutions that they can do to make those areas accessible.
Obviously, folks watching that want to help with this have got to know about the form. So how did they get the form, and what kinds of questions, if you can give us an example, will they find?
Sure. In terms of how to get the form, they can contact us. Our phone number, the Center for Independent Living, is 800-344-7211. They can also send an email to our general email address, which is info@mycil.org. So either method, and we can get them as forms and as many as they need, and get them the information on where to get it back to us.
We'll get you that number and the email address once again before we close the program. So if you're thinking you may want to help, maybe you want to grab a pencil too, have it standing by. And Keith, now as to the kinds of questions they're going to find on that form?
Sure. In terms of the questions, we do ask them to identify, obviously, where the precinct is. They don't need to know the number, just the spot, the actual location, the county. We will ask for the person's name in case we have to get an issue clarified. And what we do is we have the questions in a particular order so that it becomes a logical sequence from when a person first arrives at the building until they go through the process. So it could be, for example, are there any accessible parking spaces? Were there any issues if the person, for example, had a van with dropping the lift? Was there a lift aisle, an access way for getting out of the vehicle?
Because not all handicap spots have access for the lift to come off a van.
That's right.
Correct.
You need that small little adjacent driveway on the side.
The access aisle.
That's correct.
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So what was it like going inside? Was there a ramp, or was there not a ramp needed? Was it at a level area? Then more of the meat of the questions. What was it like going through the doors? Was it at least 32 to 36 inches wide? Was there clear and uncluttered space to get to where you need to vote? Was there a very important one, both of you referenced it earlier, was there an auto mark machine, the voting machine at an accessible station where someone who might be in a wheelchair or mobility device can reach it, and so on. There are about 15 to 17 questions altogether.
Would there also be, or if there isn't, perhaps you would want it included, perhaps an area where someone can write their own suggestions as well. You know, they may see something that nobody else has thought of.
Yeah, that's a good
yes.
point.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, that's what precipitated the need for the point we were talking about earlier about the loose gravel in the parking lot at several fire stations. We didn't have that on our questionnaire. Ours was just we're mainly addressing the point of parking spaces, entrances, access aisles,
buildings,
and so forth.
Yeah.
Buildings. That was brought to us by several consumers. Their points that they wrote on the space that we provided for extra comments. So yes, there will be plenty of space for people to put any of the points on that we might not have addressed, or anything in general that they see that needs to be addressed.
Now, after gathering, compiling, and submitting the information that you glean from these polls, do you see any really major problems of the actual voting organizations acting on these changes?
We're hoping that there won't be any. We found a couple of small points for a few when we were doing this as a test run for the general election in 2013 with Lackawanna County, and they were able to make some corrections. And so we were glad to see that. They confirmed that they were making them. This is kind of a next step, as I said before, that we want to take live and take it out to the community. So when we advocate with those 4 particular voter registration bureaus, we'll be monitoring to see what types of changes have been made.
That'd be great. If they couldn't actually retrofit the building, wouldn't that be great to have them actually change the location? I mean,
yes,
that'd really be where,
and they may have to.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be really fighting City Hall and winning.
Yep, exactly,
You know?
exactly.
Right.
I learned early on there's no such thing as a silly question, so I'm going to ask it.
Sure.
Do people watching who want to participate, do they have to be disabled to participate in this survey?
No, not necessarily. No, if they have a family member, somebody with a disability, or just a person who is active in their community and they want to see a betterment in their community and improving the likelihood and the probability that somebody with a disability will be able to vote in person, they can take the survey.
It's an equal opportunity survey.
Yeah, you know, it's funny, when David usually at the end of the week emails me the guest and the topic, so it gives me a chance to, you know, to do a little bit of research. And when I saw this, you know, Keith Williamson about disabled and voting, you know, it really didn't dawn on me. That's a really good topic, one that I'm sure goes over most people's heads. And I'm thinking, just from my experiences alone, been voting since I was, you know, able to vote and all that, I never thought of that being a major topic, and it really is. I mean, there's a lot more here than meets the eye.
Sure. Have you had problems? Have you personally had problems?
I haven't. The precinct where I vote, where I live in Clark's Green, is accessible, and that's been accessible for a number of years.
But you must have heard horror stories from others.
From others,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, really?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. A lack of access or problems with parking issues. So, yeah, there have been a number of horror stories.
Parking, I imagine, is tough. Parking would probably be, we think about ramps and wide doorways. I bet your parking comes in at the #1 problem. Because
Yes.
you really don't have a lot of, you know, blue areas for parking at a lot of these places, because they don't really expect or anticipate the volume of disabled folks twice a year for the primaries.
And 95% of us pull in and out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
right, it's not an all-day park.
You can't do that.
That's right.
Correct.
It's going to take you a few moments.
That's
Right,
right.
and the other thing is that we're showing from this and making polling sites more accessible is it benefits everybody as a whole. Chances are, if you don't have a disability now, at some point later on in life,
Yeah.
it's very possible that if not you, then maybe a loved one or a friend or somebody you know in the community might have a disability. And it might be minor, it might not be anything major, but it's still important to make polling sites accessible because that person could benefit from a place.
It's amazing how from non-important it gets to how important a priority it becomes when you have someone who becomes disabled.
And
Right.
as the late, one of the late judges from Luzerne County, Judge Brzeminski, used to tell me, it all depends on whose ox is being gored.
That's true, absolutely.
When it's yours, it's a different. Well, we're looking for your help. We want you to take advantage of this. We want you to get a hold of this survey, take it with you when you go to the polling place on May 20th, and fill it out and get it back to the center. So, Keith, as I promised, one more time, if you would please give our audience the telephone number for the Center for Independent Living and the email address where they may be able to get the form.
Sure. The telephone number to reach the Center for Independent Living would be 800-344-7211, and you can contact the center to get a form, and that email address would be info@mycil, that's mycil.org.
All right, Keith Williams for the Center for Independent Living, thank you so much for bringing this to our attention, and I hope that the audience will respond and get those surveys back so that everybody in the end can benefit. Sure. Rusty, thanks for...
Thank you so much, and good luck with your quest for information on this. It's very important.
Oh, thank you, Rusty. And Dave, thank you so much for having us, and we appreciate your help with getting the word out.
Glad to have you. And glad to have you, as always, watching us on ECTV Live. Rusty and I will see you again next week, and until we see you again, let's hope all your news is good.